Hello students, today we will continue our presentation on styles and movements and we will be looking at part 5 today. And today we will be discussing about postmodernism and we look at part 1 of postmodernism. We had discussed late modernism up till now and I had told you how late modernism was carrying forward the ideas of the modernists and there was a lot of radical changes that came in, but it was predominantly based on modernism, with space, geometry and light being important, or trying to solve the problem as an engineering problem through teamwork. So looking at these points, let's begin by first getting an introduction to postmodernism, then we will draw a comparison again between post and late modernism so that we can once again revise those points and then we will start with a deeper study of postmodernism. Postmodernism also evolved from the modernist movement as late modernism did, but it contradicts the modernist ideas. Late modernism does not contradict but carry forward the modernist ideas. Modernism, according to postmodernist architects like Robert Venturi, is considered excessively minimalist, anonymous, most of all monotonous, that is boring. It's still influenced by modernism, yet another language, architectural language has been added to modernism when we talk about postmodernism. In fact, several languages have been added and we look at how postmodernists put together their buildings. The image you see here on this slide is of the Humana building by Michael Graves. So postmodernists claim that their buildings are rooted in place and history, unlike the abstract buildings of their predecessors, that is the modernists, or even their contemporary competitors, the late modernists. Late modernists, on the other hand, totally reject historical imagery but only assign to that which was considered by the modernists in their work, or that is a part, or let us say the international style architects or the internationalists. Postmodernists say the building should have ornamentation, symbolism, historical recall, but late modernists concentrate on space, geometry and light. They do not consider ornamentation at all, they do not discuss stylistic issues at all. So if we look at postmodernist buildings, as we saw late modern buildings last time, you saw how those buildings were very sleek, or they were the white aesthetic forms of Richard Myers houses, the white aesthetic, or they were machine-like like the Lloyds of London. But you look at these buildings and they are rooted in place and history. When you look at them, you are reminded of classical architecture or Renaissance architecture, etc. When you look at them, you easily see there is ornamentation and there is symbolism. There are certain parts of the building that symbolically represent something, and we will come to that point. And it is also very playful. For example, taking a classical column in a very playful manner, what is called as freestyle classicism, and adopting it in this manner. This all falls within the purview of postmodernism. Postmodernists said they rely on modern construction and techniques, no doubt, but there is a historical recall in their buildings, as we will see in the New Starts Gallery by James Sterling. This is the picture. And in late modernism, there are abstract propositions of geometry and organization, as we saw in the Athenaeum by Richard Meyer, or like in Lloyds of London or the HSBC, they approach the building as a series of technical problems to be solved by teamwork. This is again a visual comparison, I showed you this before. Two skyscrapers built about the same time. Humana building is postmodernist, HSBC is late modernist. Now I stand a little corrected here. When I say HSBC is late modernist, I also will go on to tell you that HSBC falls within the category of high-tech architecture. So is high-tech architecture a subset of late modernism? Now actually high-tech architecture is such a strong and wide movement that it merits its own title. That is why it is not clubbed under late modernism but is often studied separately. So there is a link with late modernism, it is carrying forward the ideas, but we will be seeing high-tech vocabulary on its own, what it stands for. Now some of the points that that relate to post or late modernism. For example, we will see free style classicism. I just showed you the picture using classical architecture in a very free form. Historical recall, that is recalling history through their buildings, like application of ornament or symbolic form. Late modernism is silver abstraction. We saw that, for example, in the in the Sainsbury Center for Visual Arts, or it has a neutral grid. There is structure and equipment as ornament. Centre Pompidou is a classic example. Or they have a promise of the future. You look at the building and you're reminded what future holds for us in the time to come. Now let's come to freestyle classicism. For example, this building by Michael Graves, the Klaus Pegas Winery, and in this, as you see this column, you can easily make out that this has been borrowed from classical architecture, and this is the picture of the Parthenon with the classical order columns. And here they use these classical elements like columns on pediments and arches, but in a very fun, creative way, or in an exaggerated way. The forms are often stylized and oversized and not exactly look like the real classical buildings. They use bright colors, they use modern materials and symbolic decoration, not just traditional materials like stone and marble. So this thing will continue being repeated. Postmodernists are looking back into history, they are going back towards ornamentation, but they are continuing to use modern materials and technology. In fact, the picture that I showed you of Humana and the HSBC, if you scrape off the facade, if you look inside the building, underneath the curtain wall, within the building, both possess modern technology. So whether it's a postmodern or a late modern building, both rely heavily on modern technology for construction and operation. Now this is mix of classical language with modern building needs is what you find in the postmodern building, like in offices or institutional buildings. There is often a sense of humor in their buildings or a storytelling that is going on. Buildings are they try to make their buildings expressive and engaging with their viewer. Historical recall, like the Piazza d'Italia in New Orleans by Charles Moore, where if you look at it, you are reminded of, for example, the Marine Theatre in Hadrian, or you're reminded of the Trevi Fountain in Italy. So you get a historical recall when you look at this project, because the past architectural styles have been used in a new and modern context. It mixes old forms with new materials, connects the past with the present. It is not a copying of the past, but rather a reinterpretation of the past in a modern way. It brings a lot of variety, a lot of cultural depth back into architecture, which they say was missing in modernism. In applied ornament, the decoration is applied on the building surface in 2D or shallow 3D. It does not arise from the structure, but rather it is put on the building, pasted on the building, or placed on or attached to the building. Whereas in modernism, they said that if there has to be any kind of ornamentation, it should follow out of form follows function. I'll give you an example. We saw that in the Seagram building, where Mies van der Rohe used a lot of eye sections which were not at all load bearing. They were simply acting as eye sections in front of the mullions dividing the glass panes, and they were accentuating the mullions, and they were providing a rhythm to the building and giving an increased sense of tallness in the building. So that eye section, which was actually non-load bearing, became an ornamental member of the building, though it followed from the construction system of the building, the tectonic of the building. So here it's different. Here they are doing ornamentation for the sake of ornamentation, where in that case that I talked to you about the Seagram building, it was very subtle. It was not obvious to the eye that this is ornamentation. They also reintroduce meaning, memory, humor into their architecture, and in symbolic form, the building's shape or design communicates a deeper meaning or a story. It's not just about function or style. The form is a symbol of something. It can be culture, it can be religion, it can be history, or it can even be identity. The building is designed to speak to people using very familiar or meaningful forms. Like this building, the Lighthouse Theatre in Canada, they are using a lighthouse. as a part of the built form. Now a lighthouse, now this is a kind of argument that would be given to us by Charles Jenks. A lighthouse is a beacon of guidance. So here the symbolic form is the theatre is a beacon of cultural and intellectual light in the community. So this symbolism in the building is meant to convey this idea that this lighthouse theatre is a beacon of intellectual and cultural light within the community, and it is so obvious that it is hard to be missed. In postmodernism in the past, it was easier to, not postmodernism rather, just in the past, it was easier to produce, let's say, a perfect building in a more integrated, slow changing society where the craftsman, the artist, the client, the architect shared similar values and followed well known patterns. But in modern architecture, it has become much more complex and therefore much more fallible, much more prone to failure. Therefore, it is acceptable to have a certain level of openness in our criticism of modern architecture and to allow for mixed judgments, allowed to have varying opinions about the architecture that we are looking at. So Robert Venturi goes ahead to speak in his book Complexity and Contradiction in Architecture, which is said to be the manifesto that defines postmodernism in the 20th century, and which was the sounding horn, the building that he designed, Vanna Venturi House, his mother's house, which became the foundational structure to guide the understanding of postmodernism. So he says architects can try to ignore ornamental and decorative elements in buildings or even try to abolish them, but they will not go away. Ornamentation, decoration will not go away or will not go away for a long time because architects do not have the power to replace them, nor do they know what to replace them with. Now this is a very strong point he makes, that ornamentation and decoration will continue to be a part of buildings. Even if we try to abolish them or a certain strand of architecture tries to abolish them, they will come back in some way. And I will not go into the controversy of the statement. Suffice to say that this is historically noted that postmodernists relied heavily on trying to bring that kind of ornamentation and decoration into their buildings. So when in his book Learning from Las Vegas, Robert Venturi talks about the idea of communication, interpretation and pluralism, in that sequence, communication is that ornamental and decorative elements are for variety and for communication. Buildings can speak clearly to the signs and symbols we impart to the building through ornamentation, and these are signs and symbols through ornamentation that people can understand. Interpretation is that the communication that we are receiving through these ornaments can be interpreted in many ways. So people can find different meanings in a building, not just one fixed idea. For example, Charles Jenks talks about double coding in postmodernism, where it speaks one way to those people who are scholarly and who are in deeper connection with the world of architecture, and in a very different way to the lay person who is simply enjoying the building. And there also people will find multiple meanings. Pluralism talks about that architecture can show variety in the way it communicates, in the way the building speaks to people, or gives different meanings to different people, like we have it in our cities and in our cultures. Let's take a very simple example which has become, or which was one of the important features in the Vanna Venturi House, which was the pioneering building, so to speak, of postmodernism, and that is the traditional gable roof. Now you know that though it serves the functional purpose in climates with rain and snow, though it is a logical way of creating larger spans with shorter structural members, but it is rare in modern houses which are machines for living in, as Corbusier said, to find gable roofs. Modern houses have flat roofs. But the traditional gable roof is a very powerful symbol of what? of a house. It is the traditional memory of a house. If we ask a child to make the picture of a house, he will generally go for a pitched or a gabled roof, because that conveys the picture of houseness. And this example of the reclaimed gabled roof is what appears in the Vanna Venturi house, but Venturi breaks the gable in the middle, thus denying the functionality of the gable form itself. We can make out by looking at it that it's not meant to take away rain and snow. It's not meant to increase or provide us a larger span. So functional aspect is not there. Overall the impact is purely symbolic. But what is it conveying? Through the Vanna Venturi house, in a sense, Robert Venturi was once again reclaiming the house from the modernists or the late modernists. That the house, the traditional house that warms our heart when we imagine it in our mind, is this house. And in order to emphasize that, he completely exaggerated the gable roof. In the first manifesto of postmodern architecture, which he had written, the house he designed for his mother Vanna Venturi was based on that manifesto. The first critique and a direct challenge to modernism. Modernism, which is about minimalism, functionality, structural honesty, versus the Venturi house, which is about ornamental elements like a false arch, an oversized chimney, and about ambiguity and contradiction. There is symmetry, but there is also asymmetry. There is solid, but there is also void. There is scale, but it is either big or small. So these conditions exist together. So there is an ambiguity about the axis, for example, about the symmetry, for example, and thus there is also contradiction. One point contradicts the other in the house. So the straightforward way of defining a house, as a modernist would do or a late modernist would do, in postmodernism it is much more complex. So when Venturi talks about complexity and contradiction in architecture, this house is a key example of his ideas. Architecture should be rich, layered and symbolic, not stripped down like in modernism. The form is a symbol. The house looks like a house. It has a gable roof, it has a chimney, which intentionally evokes memory, familiarity, and communicates to us the idea of a house. These are core postmodern ideas. It preceded major postmodern works like the Piazza d'Italia or the Portland building, and thus this building, the Venturi house, is truly pioneering. Now some basic elements like the gable, a door, windows, chimney are arranged in a very simple design. So if you compare it with any gable roofed, pitched roof or a pyramidal roof house, you find the similarity between the two. You can relate the Vanna Venturi house with the traditional picture of a house. It's modern, but it has a strong expression of the traditional ideas of a home. The house is built on a rigid axial symmetry and it becomes monumental in the street facade, but when you look at the sides and then look at the back, it becomes loose in the extremities and the rear of the house. There is a historical recall. You can actually compare it, for example, with the Chiswick house designed by Richard Boyle, the Earl of Burlington in 1725 in the 18th century, and I have taught you in the very earliest lectures that this Chiswick house was actually an imitation of the Villa Rotunda designed in the Renaissance period by Andrea Palladio. Now Andrea Palladio's house was very rigidly symmetrical on all four sides. Chiswick house was not, but Chiswick house had a very strong symmetry in the front facade. That kind of symmetry also appears in the Vanna Venturi house, but though it recalls the classical forms, there is distortion and there is ambiguity. For example, it appears symmetrical, it has a strong central axis, but the axis then breaks down. Why? Because when you look at the right and the left, they are not identical to each other. It starts by conveying to you an axial symmetry, you connect with that and then it breaks down. So it becomes ambiguous. Is it symmetrical? Is it asymmetrical? Then there is an abstracted pediment. This pediment that you would normally see in both the Chiswick house and in the Villa Rotunda is not the regular pediment in the Venturi house. So he is not copying history, but he is transforming or reinterpreting it for the modern times. Now the comparison I'll draw with a few houses between the Venturi house and houses maybe a little before the Venturi house, like the Winslow house in 1893 by Frank Lloyd Wright, and that house also had a very strong axial symmetry in the front facade like the Venturi house, but both of them, the symmetry completely breaks down in the rear facade. The rear of the Winslow house is a collection of roofs or a collection of forms, and so the Venturi house also is completely not symmetrical in the rear. Then comparing the Venturi house with the Villa Stein by Le Corbusier. Now here the differences are strikingly contrasting. That means the window is like a hole or a puncture in the wall in the Venturi house, but in the Villa Stein there are ribbon windows. The gable roof has a symbolic arch which is not structural, versus the Villa Stein being a cuboidal geometry with a flat roof. There is distorted symmetry in the Venturi house versus regularity in facade, not symmetry but a regularity in facade, which is one of the principles laid out about the international style, which was given by Philip Johnson and Henry Russell Hitchcock. One of the principles was regularity in facade. That means the facade may not have a strong axis, but the facade having modular components has that regularity in it, like the workshop wing facade of the Bauhaus. The steel windows with the glass in it is repeated in a very regular fashion throughout the facade, top to bottom, side to center. That is the regularity in facade. So this we find in modernism, but not in the Venturi house, which has got a distorted symmetry. In the Venturi house, thus again there is symmetry versus, even if it's ambiguous, it's there, versus complete asymmetry in the Smith house by Richard Meyer, built about the same time as the Vanna Venturi house. In fact, this is a classical contrast between a postmodern house and a late modern house. Or if we compare it with the house 3, the Miller house of Peter Eisenman, then we find the Vanna Venturi has a simple plan with a symbolic conception. It is like a simple house, a day-to-day house. But the house 3 is far more spatially abstract plan. It is a far more difficult abstract composition. Or there are close Indian replications to the Vanna Venturi house. For example, the tube house designed by Charles Correa, or even the Ramakrishna house in Ahmedabad by Charles Correa. Even more so, India also has a kind of a postmodern example of this traditional house with the gable roof, and that is a very wonderful small house called the Chakravarti residence, built by Romy Khosla in 1975 in New Delhi. And the amazing part of this house is the tall chimney, exaggeratedly tall chimney, just as Robert Venturi exaggerates the gable roof, Romy Khosla exaggerates the chimney. So much so that the chimney is nearly 2/3 the total height of the house itself. And this exaggerated chimney is a symbolic representation of colonial architecture, and it is also playful, as in the Venturi house there are playful elements. Now the large scale of the Vanna Venturi house is counterbalanced by the complexity of the form. The form itself can be divided and subdivided into several components, into a rectangle and into a couple of triangles. Thus the monumentality, the large scale that it appears to have with a very massive gable roof can actually be broken down. And then again, it has got distorted proportions. If you were to make a house, you would try to keep certain lines in certain windows or certain doors at certain heights consistently throughout. But when you look at this house, you find that the main cutout and the main entrance has got one height, then the glass door on the side has got another height, and apparently the windows have got another height. If you can watch it carefully here, you can see the glass door is slightly higher than the windows, which normally we wouldn't do. We would try to keep the lintel heights consistent throughout for the windows and the doors. So the entrance, the glass door, the windows, all three are having varying heights. It's a distorted proportion. So again we get into ambiguity, that though there seems to be proportionate, but the proportions are distorted. So is it or is it not? That ambiguity reappears. If we go forward, idea of symmetry, asymmetry, the ratio between the height and width of the glass doors is similar to the height and width ratio of the entrance. So there is that kind of proportion relation in the house, but when you go to the back rear facade, the glass door here is shifted away from the central axis towards the left, and the chimney is shifted towards the right. Thus it creates a visual balance for the overall facade. As you can see in this picture again, if this is the central line, the glass door is on the left and the chimney is shifted towards the right. The plans and elevations are on a rigid axial geometry, but like I said, that axial geometry is also broken in the facade. The fireplace, chimney and staircase are part of a central core and intermingle with each other at various levels as you climb the staircase. These are the interiors of the Vanna Venturi house, and it reminds you of what a normal house would be, a traditional standard house would be, though there are certain abstract features in it, in the way the wall, for example, has been inclined above the way the staircase has been taken above the chimney. Those variations are there. Here we find this arch. It seems to be moving forward, but then we know later on that it will finish, it will be cut off, it is incomplete one side and it starts again on the other side. Now in the Venturi interior, it has ambiguity, it has historical reference and spatial surprise, referring to postmodern complexity, but not in modernism. In modernism, even in their houses, there is functionalism and there is clarity, not ambiguity. The spaces are very clearly defined. Let's again take the example of the Smith house by Richard Meyer. In this interior, there is a lot of clarity in the way the spaces have been organized. In the last lecture, if you remember, I talked about this house, or a lecture before that, about the rear being the public areas of the house and the front where you enter in are the private areas of the house, and how glass has been used. This whole space opens up looking towards the sea. There is clarity, there is natural light, there is geometric order, and it extends the idea of late modernism, which is not there in the postmodernist Venturi house. Moving on from the pioneering Vanna Venturi house, let's come to other examples of postmodernism and keep on looking at various aspects of postmodernism. For example, it is characterized by double coding. I told you about that. Two or more styles coexist in contradiction. It can be part modern and part something else, and it can be speaking at two levels at once, to a concerned minority of architects who are sensitive to fine distinctions, the scholars, the theorists, and then to the common users and the passerby who just want to understand the building and enjoy it. They don't want to go into the depths of these various movements or the subsets to it. They just want to enjoy the building as is. But in postmodernism, there is eclecticism, a collection of historical styles. There are new ideas with traditional forms. There are familiar shapes used in unexpected ways, like a binocular is used to make a building called the Binocular Building by Frank Gehry, and buildings incorporate symbols to make a statement or simply to delight the viewer. Like if you go to the Team Disney building in Florida, there is also a certain rationality behind it. Please do not misunderstand that postmodernism is about irrationality. It is not. There are specific reasons why postmodernists are making their buildings or were making their buildings in the 20th century the way they did. For example, in the Team Disney building, the whole building is in concrete with glass fenestrations, as a modernist building would be. Only thing is that the architects here are responding to the context. It's an amusement park for children. That is why it has warm colors both inside and outside. The building is symmetrical about this central cylinder. The building composition is symmetrical around this frustum, rather I should say, around this frustum. And there are these bright warm colors that have been used throughout the building because it's meant to amuse children. So the context of colors here. Now there is also a visual evidence of Baroque like decoration in postmodernism, but it appears piecemeal. It does not appear holistic as in Baroque, where the entire building was completely ornamented. Even the structural members were a part of the overall decoration of the building. In fact, in postmodernistic decoration appears more similar or closer to the neoclassical ornamentation of 18th century Robert Adam. So if you take this example, which is a town hall in Austria by Hans Hollein, and you compare it with Baroque, you find that it does not match the excessive ornamentation or the profuse ornamentation of Baroque, but it is closer in context to this picture, an interior by Robert Adam. So if you want to take a closer glimpse, this is the postmodern ceiling versus that of Baroque, which is extremely richly ornamented. There is also resemblance with Art Deco. In some places we find that like this building in Norway shows a close similarity to the decorative work of Art Deco. There is also symbolic representation, for example, in this building by Hans Hollein in Iran to the Middle Eastern roots where this building is situated, and ornamentation has been done for the sake of ornamentation, something the modernists or the late modernists would not do. There is also another building in Austria by Hans Hollein, the Austrian Travel Bureau, where there is a symbolism of palm trees representative of the Arab culture that he has placed there. So let us come to this part, the radical eclecticism. I have talked about eclecticism in Industrial Revolution, where they were making buildings as a collection of historical styles. Here there is a radical eclecticism, the building that freely mixes multiple historical styles, materials, scales, meanings. For example, this San Antonio Public Library, which has traditional Mexican architecture, it has got modernist elements, it has got geometric forms all in one building. It has got these very strong colors borrowed from traditional Mexican architecture or that background. Justification of using a style or a mixture of style is based on three main determinants under radical eclecticism in this movement. That is, what is the context of the building? Is it an urban building? Is it a rural building? What are the variety of the functions the building has, and what is the specific taste culture of the users? That is why this radical eclecticism is not like the more random eclecticism of Industrial Revolution, but a more well thought out eclecticism, having all three have important effect, these 3 points have an important effect on the design of making a building radically eclectic. Thus, again I will repeat, it is a more thoughtful collection of styles, not the easy shuffling of styles that was done in the 19th century. This theory of justifying different styles in different situations has been given by the postmodernists. Coming to this example, the Piazza d'Italia in New Orleans by Charles Moore, it has got a rich expression of historical revival in contemporary architecture. It resembles truly an Italian square, including a real fountain, like you would find an Italian fountain. It has got some semblance of Renaissance, borrowed from antiquity, classical architecture, and putting it together with a very bright, colorful form in postmodernism. It is paradoxical how he quotes Italian antiquity, Italian ancient architecture in far away America, in New Orleans, through this project. And it has got many audiences, many people who will respond to this building differently. Historians They have references to the Marine Theatre of Adrian that you see here, and the triumphal gateway of Schinkel appearing in Piazza d'Italia in some form. For the Sicilians, references to the archetypal piazzas and fountains that they find in Italy. For the modernists, it is an acknowledgement of the skyscrapers and the use of current technologies, for example, the use of neon and concrete. With regard to the skyscraper, it appears, though I do not discuss it here, it appears that there are skyscrapers behind which have got bands of black and white, and those bands of black and white appear in concentric circles on the floor of the Piazza d'Italia. There are curved concentric colonnades, 5 of them representing the 5 orders: Doric, Ionic, Corinthian, Tuscan and Composite, in proper order with proper capitals. So the Italianness is clearly symbolized by the echoes of the Trevi fountain in Italy, by the 5 classical orders, the strong earth colors, the Latin inscription, and the plan of Italy that is engraved on the floor, along with the Adriatic and the Tryphenian seas, which are represented by the moving water in the fountain. So this is a historical recall. It is eclectic. It is taken from Renaissance, it is taken from antiquity, but the way Charles Moore has put it together is very, very thoughtful. There is a meaning behind what he has done here, and if we are patient, we can read that meaning in this building. So if we draw a comparison here, for example, the way the arches have been to this cathedral in the Philippines, and there have been many such examples of that period or that architecture, that historical architecture with which we can compare this building. But there is also a distorted context. In the case of Piazza d'Italia by Charles Moore, we find it is a very well worked out context, and there is a wonderful story behind it, but the distorted context can appear. For example, we see that in the Hiranandani complex by Hafiz Contractor, where he uses European historical architecture in these apartments in Mumbai, which are totally out of context and totally only like a pastiche, a pasted work, not a part of the overall theme. We will stop here and we will continue our discussion of postmodernism in the next presentation. Thank you.